Know that there is but one God above.
The purpose of today's class is to give everybody a sensitivity into a very, very old mitzvah, the mitzvah of the Mezuza. A sensitivity, a deeper understanding, an awareness as to why people have kept this particular mitzvah of hanging a mezuzah on one's doorpost for thousands and thousands of years. There's one sentence that transcends all aspects of Jewish religion. Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, egalitarian, it makes no difference. This one sentence has been uttered tens of millions of times throughout history. And of course the sentence that I'm referring to is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Our rabbis teach us that this sentence was actually said to our father Jacob by the 12 tribes. If you remember, Jacob had struggled with an angel of God. And he won. He was victorious in his battle. And at the end of the ordeal, the angel looks at him and said, Jacob, your name shall no longer be Jacob. From now on, your name will be Yisrael, Israel. That will be your new name. Before Jacob's death, Jacob looked at his children. They had been through so much, and he wanted to make sure that they were still united as one, together as a family, as a religion, and most importantly, serving one God. So he looked at them with question and said, are you united? Are you one? To which they answered, Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, or our father, whose name was now Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, and they used two different names for God. The name of Hashem, Adonai, and the name of Eloheinu. They used those two names because each one of those names represents a little bit of a different aspect of God. The name Yud and then Hey and Vav and then Hey represents God's mercy. And the name of Eloheinu represents God's judicial aspects. And the tribes understood, the 12 sons of Jacob understood, that whether through good times or through bad, whether God was in a mode of mercy or being judging, either way, they still served one God. They understood God's oneness and God's authority over decisions over them. So they looked at their father and they said, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Father, let it be known to you that we are united as a family, we are united as a religion, and we serve one merciful and judicial God. Or to put it in a terminology that Americans are more familiar with, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The very first proclamation of a Pledge of Allegiance was made by the 12 tribes of Israel regarding their unity to God. Throughout history, persecution after persecution. Unfortunately, whether it was the Nazis, whether it was the Spanish Inquisition, all the way back to Egypt, we know one thing, that when a Jew is confronted with those moments, those last few moments, when he didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening, every Jew went to his Maker with the same words on his mouth, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And those are the very, very words that are written inside, on the parchment scroll of the Mezuza. Do you want to know how deep inside of us that Shema Yisrael really is? After World War II, when many children were left behind, they were put up by Christian families. And parents had no choice but to leave their children. They did it to save their lives. And many Christian families took those Jewish children in and made them Christians over the next few years. And when the war was over, and those surviving people went back to try and find their children, nobody was giving up these children so quickly. Nobody admitted that the child they had was Jewish. Nobody admitted the child they had was adopted. It was a very, very difficult task to gather up the Jewish children. Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who was a Rav in Lublin at that time, and he was also the Jewish representative to the Polish Senate, went back after the war to try and gather these Jewish children. As I mentioned a moment ago, nobody was very quickly admitting as to who these children were. And they said, sure, if you can identify the child, if you have some proof, you can take the children back with you. He didn't know what to do. And then he had an idea. He waited until Sunday morning when all the families were gathered in the churches, when all the children were there with their parents, and he came into church with his long robe and his beard and his payas. And he walked up to the front of the church and he just looked out at the audience and he closed his eyes and he began to cry and he started saying, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And he quickly opened up his eyes and he looked around the room. And all the children who were crying, all the tears that were running from all the children, he looked up at them and he said, you. And he identified all the Jewish children who deep in their souls knew Shema Yisrael, who had heard this sentence said to them every night before they went to sleep, and who had this vibration within them going all the way back to our forefathers. That's how deep the essence of a Jew and Shema Yisrael are united together and are bound with one another. Our rabbis teach us that what sustains the world is the pasuk of Shema Yisrael. Our rabbis teach us that God gets angry with all the nations of the world and all the people on the planet, for they have strayed from Him. They go to other gods. They worship idols. They forget that God is in existence. And the angels come to God and they say, may your name be sanctified throughout all the worlds, just as the Jewish people sanctify your name regularly on this world by saying Shema Yisrael. And Chazal says that this appeases God to the point where He says, okay, I will not indeed destroy the world. I will give everybody a chance. I will continue with creation the way we know it. If you remember the paragraphs in the Torah, right after the sentence of Shema Yisrael, there's another paragraph. And that paragraph begins, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And in that paragraph it defines how Hashem says to us, how God says to us. I want you to write this down, and I want you to wear it as tefillin, and I want you to hang it on the doorpost of your home, on the doorpost of your door, as a reminder of the love that we have to Hashem, and of the love that He in turn has for us. And He has a very, very simple requirement. God tells us, if you put this on your doorpost, I will protect your home. When we say put them on the doorpost of your home, we're not talking about the fancy mezuzah box that's on the outside. That's a beautiful thing. We put a fancy mezuzah box and we spend money on that to enhance the mitzvah of mezuzah. That is our way of showing God how dear and beloved this mitzvah is to us. But the important part is not the silver casing. The important part is the insides. And Hashem says that if you put the insides properly on your door, I will watch over your home, I will watch over you, I will watch over your family. It's a very simple exchange. Take these two paragraphs, put them on your doorpost, and in return, I will watch over you and make sure that you are well. As a matter of fact, the scroll that we put there on the inside has 3 letters written on the outside. After you roll it up, the sofer, the scribe, writes 3 letters on the outside of the mezuzah. And that's a shin, a daled, and a yud. Those 3 letters say one of God's holiest and holiest of names. The name of Shaddai. That's the name that we write on the outside. But those 3 letters are also an acrostic. They're an acrostic for Shin, Daled, Yud, Shomer, Dal Sois, Yisrael, who watches over the doorways of Israel. A very, very simple exchange. You put up the mezuzah, and God watches over you. Very simple, very direct, very explicit, and written by God in the Torah thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. Let me tell you a little story that will explain a bit of the power of the mezuzah itself. And I know this story is true because I heard it from the little boy who was there, who told it to me. Today this little boy is in his mid-80s. The story took place in Vienna, towards the end of the war. The Nazis were looking for all Jews, but especially the rabbiners, all the rabbis, the great rabbis they wanted more than anybody. The Skolye Rebbe was hiding out in Vienna with his son, and they were in an apartment building in one of the apartments in Vienna. The son is the one who told me this story. One day he's sitting by his window, and he looks out the window, and he sees a car pull up, and a whole bunch of German officers come out of the car. Obviously he was afraid. So he went running over to his father, and his father said to him, "What are you afraid of?" And he said, "I just saw German soldiers coming out of the car. They're coming into our building." His father looks at him and says, "Don't be afraid. Come with me." The Skolye Rebbe went over to the doorpost. He told his son, "Hold on to my gartel. Hold on to my belt." And his son did that. And the Rebbe took one hand and put it up on the doorpost where the mezuzah was. And he took his other hand and he covered his eyes. And he just stood there. And the Nazis came into the building door by door, knocking on the doors. "Juden heraus! Juden heraus!" And they chased all the Jews out of the building. And they're going door by door by door, and the Rebbe just stood there with his hand on the mezuzah and his other hand over his eyes and his son holding on to his belt. And the Nazis came to the door to the left of their apartment, kicked the door open, screaming, "Juden heraus!" And then they skipped his door and went to the door on the other side, knocked on the door, kicked the door open, "Juden heraus!" They emptied the entire building of all the Jews, and they never touched the Rebbe's door or apartment. A few minutes later, after they left the building, the Rebbe looked at his son and he said, "Okay, now we can leave." The power of the mezuzah is not in the box. The power of the mezuzah is in the emunah, in the belief that we have in what it says on that parchment. It's in the belief that we believe deep down inside of us, that we know there's a vibration going all the way back to our father Jacob, to our forefathers, of there is one God, and we believe in a merciful and judicial God. It's that belief that allows the power of the mezuzah to work. But just like any transmitter that you may be familiar with, an old-fashioned FM radio, if the wires are not properly wired, then even though the radio will turn on and make a lot of scratchy noises, it will not receive the FM transmission. The waves are out there, they're in the air, they're being transmitted. But your radio won't receive it because the wires are crossed. Two wires are touching. It's not working correctly. And therefore the vessel cannot properly receive the energy, the waves that are put out there. And the same is true of a mezuzah. If two letters on the mezuzah are touching, if it is not written on the proper parchment, if the mezuzah itself is not written with the proper kavanah, with the proper mindset, by an individual who understands what we're talking about, by an individual who understands that the purpose of the mezuzah is the inside of the heart, is the commitment of Shema Yisrael. That type of an individual has to write a mezuzah. There are people who go to mikveh, they immerse themselves in a ritual bath every time before they write God's name on a mezuzah. It's that commitment that they have to the mezuzah, the proper parchment, the proper writing of the letters, and the way it's put together. That's what gives and imbues the mezuzah with its power. It cannot just be letters touching. You know, you say, what's the big deal if two letters touch? So what? So two letters touch. Why should that invalidate the entire mezuzah? There's a little letter missing, a tiny little yud. I forgot to put that on the parchment. Are we being ridiculous? Why should that invalidate the entire mezuzah? I'm going to read you a letter that this gentleman named Rob had written to a rabbi, and I'm going to read you the rabbi's response. And the letter goes as follows. Dear Rabbi, Why does the Jewish religion fuss so much over insignificant things? How much matzah do we have to eat? Did the spoon go with dairy or with meat? What is the proper way to tie one's shoelaces? It seems to me that this misses the bigger point. We're focusing on nitpicking. Is this really spirituality? Is this what Jews think is spirituality? This little nitpicking and this little details? And then he says, I actually already wrote you and sent you this letter, and I've not received a response, Rabbi. Could it be that somebody has finally asked you a question that you were incapable of answering? To which the rabbi responded, Dear Rob, I never claim to have all the answers. There are many questions that are beyond the scope of my awareness and my understanding. But it happens to be that I did respond to you, even though I was in the middle of a very, very busy speaking tour throughout Europe. When I received your letter, I did respond to you the same day. And the reason you did not get my response is the very answer to your question. You see, I noticed that I sent your response email to Rob at yahoo.com instead of at yahoo.com. I left out the dot before the word com. I mean, come on. It's not like I wrote your name wrong or something drastic like that. Would anybody be so nitpicky as to differentiate between yahoo.com and yahoo.com? Obviously, that dot represents a lot more than just the pixels on the screen which form the shape of that dot. To me, that dot may be insignificant, but that's because of my ignorance as to the way of the web. All I know is, with the dot, the email gets to its proper destination. Without the dot, it gets lost in cyberspace. Torah observance and mitzvah fulfillment contain a world of symbolism, and every dot counts. When the mitzvot are performed with precision, they create a spiritual vibration which makes its way all the way to God's inbox. If you want to understand the meaning of the dot, study cybertech. If you want to understand the details of Judaism, study Torah. If we want God's protection as promised, then we need to know that there are details involved with the mezuzah. There are details of which door requires a mezuzah, which door post requires the mezuzah, the direction of the mezuzah, how it should be hung, where it should be hung. These are all very important. I'm going to tell you a story. This is a true story. Once again, I was personally involved and I heard the details from the father. This took place about 26 years ago in Toronto. I will leave the name out. I will just call my friend Avram. My friend had a big simcha. He had a baby boy. And everybody was very, very ecstatic and very happy for him, like one is for any mazel tov, for any birth of a child. The problem was, unfortunately, this baby boy was born with his heart upside down and backwards. Needless to say, he required much, much surgery, many, many times over the first years of his life. I will tell you up front, Baruch Hashem, he's fine today, he has a family of his own, and he's doing wonderfully. I tell you this story because about a month or so after the birth, while the father was taking his son in every couple of days to the hospital, every couple of weeks to the hospital for procedures, and they weren't sure whether or not it was going to work in the beginning. He told me that he had checked all the mezuzahs in his house to see the status if they were kosher or not. He came over to me and he said to me, Rebbe Nachum, I don't know if you're going to believe me or not, but when I took the mezuzah off of my bedroom door, the parchment inside the mezuzah was upside down and backwards, just like my son's heart, which was upside down and backwards. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, God forbid, that if a mezuzah is placed improperly, it's going to cause harm or damage. But what I am saying is that if you want it to work properly, It has to be set up properly. It has to be put in properly. One cannot take a piece of the Jewish forwards, roll it up, and stick it into a fancy box, hang it on the door, and expect it to work in any which way. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure you have, but if you look at any mezuzah on a doorpost, they're always on an angle. Why is that? Why is the mezuzah on an angle on that door? You know, in the tractate in the Gemara, there is a debate between two Tanoim, between two rabbis. They debate the direction of the mezuzah. One says that the mezuzah should be vertical, and the other says no, it should be placed horizontally. So out of deference to both opinions, we place the mezuzah on an angle. The question screams to be asked, where else in the Talmud, where else in Jewish law do we ever see a compromise when there's a debate between two rabbis as to how to do something? We make a decision, Hanukkah, there's a debate. Do we start with one candle and go to 8? Do we start with 8 and work our way down to 1? We don't compromise and say work from 4 in and out. We don't do that. We have a decision. The halacha is like Hillel, and we start with 1 candle and we work our way up to 8. And that's true with every halacha. We pick one side. So why is it that when it comes to mezuzah, instead of just saying, do it vertically or do it horizontally, Chazal come back to us with, no, put it on an angle out of deference to both opinions. And I once heard a beautiful, beautiful answer. The mezuzah hangs on one's doorpost as you go into a house. When a young couple, a married couple, a couple that's been married for many, many years, when you walk into your house and you reach up to kiss that mezuzah as you walk in, and you see the mezuzah is on an angle, you should be reminded that the success in relationships is based on compromise. If a person's not willing to compromise, it is very difficult to have a proper and healthy relationship with your wife, with your children, and how much more so with God. So we put the mezuzah on an angle to remind us of our need to compromise. When I say our need to compromise with God, I mean the following. We live in a world today that is much more complicated and much more difficult than any time in history. It would be very, very nice if everybody understood and believed and was able to grasp all the rules and laws of the Torah and abide by them on a daily basis. Beautiful. But we live in a world where that's not so. And there are those who can and those who can't, and those who do and those who don't. Compromise means to know, with all the temptations of the world around us, how much can I handle? How much am I willing to take on? How much am I not willing to take on? How much can I do? And can I do a drop more than I did yesterday? That's all God requires of us. He wants us to be in a mindset to know that even though this is the way I act and this is what I am, I should not fool myself into thinking that I've achieved spiritual holiness and the highest level obtainable in His world. He just wants you to know, I love you for who you are. I accept you for who you are. But always know a little compromise. You're living in this world. You're utilizing all the physical benefits of this world, all the beauty of this world that I've given you. Give me back a little bit. Whether it's going to synagogue once in a while, whether it's making a blessing on something that you eat, whether it's enjoying a Shabbat meal at somebody's house, or even more simply, making sure that your mezuzah is kosher. A simple act, like checking your mezuzah, making sure it's kosher, and if not, buying a nice, healthy, quality parchment to put on your doorpost, which can make the statement every single day, God, I love you. God, I believe in you. God, please in return, watch over me. That's all God asks. Put it on the doorpost, the proclamation of you should love the God, your God, with all your love, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That being said, I'm hoping that we have a little bit of a understanding of mezuzah to show that it's not some religious fanaticism. It's a contract with God. I show you my love, and you protect me, like any parent would with a child. Respect me. Show me you appreciate what I do for you. Show me you appreciate what I give you. And in return, my responsibility as a parent, as your God, is to watch over you, your home, and your house. There are many, many of us who, even though we may say, I don't need it, I'm okay, my life's great, but we have children, and we have grandchildren, and we live in a world where, unfortunately, assimilation, intermarriage, these types of situations are so prevalent, they're so strong in this day and age, and people don't even realize the numbers and the percentages of how we are losing our Jewish children day after day. Something as simple as a kosher mezuzah on your front door can make such a difference. I hope I've given you something to hold on to. I hope I've given you something to think about. And I hope that you will take the time to get the parchment checked by a proper sofer, by a proper scribe, to have it looked at, to have it checked, and to remember every once in a while as you walk into your home to reach up, kiss the mezuzah, and say, God, I love you. I'm willing to have that bond. I'm willing to have that contract. I'll show you my love. And in exchange, watch over us, please. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Thank you.
Shema Yisrael, know that there is but one God above.